Well, good morning and welcome to Domain 2, Ethics and Professionalism, an ethics update for internal auditors. Welcome. First thing I'll do, I'm Doug Mims, and I'll introduce myself here in a moment on another slide. But just to go through the housekeeping items to make sure that everybody gets CPE credit. So there's one CPE credit offered for this course. There are no partial CPE credits, so you need to stay on the whole time. And also in doing so, you need to make sure you answer 3 of the 4 poll questions. Make sure you've logged in with your unique link that you got as a result of registering, so that your email address that you're using is aligned with your registration. You'll receive a certificate via email within 7 days. And any questions that you have, you can run through our marketing team at marketing@criadv.com. And the CPA survey will be available in the web browser immediately following the webinar. Also, PDF handouts of the presentation slides are accessible for download through the Zoom chat. And otherwise, we are registered with NASBA, and we believe that we conform with all NASBA requirements. And so there should be no issue with you getting CPE. And I just saw something pop up in the chat, and I was making sure that was not for me. Okay, so onward we go. So the program description, basically we're covering Domain 2 of the Global Internal Audit Standards, which is Ethics and Professionalism, as the title says. And we'll do a high-level review of that so that you all can kind of get an introduction, if you don't already have one, which you may, to the Global Internal Audit Standards, as well as specifically Domain 2, so that the intent would be that when you're done, you'll know what makes up Domain 2, all 13 standards. You'll be able to understand what's important, what's expected of you, and give you the basis for applying those Domain 2 in your practice, in your role, on a go-forward basis. So CRI presenter is me. I'm Doug Mims. I am a partner with CRI Advisors, LLC, as well as Carr, Riggs and Ingram, LLC. Carr, Riggs and Ingram, LLC is the attest firm in our alternative practice structure. I'm also the financial institution's subline leader, or one of the subline leaders. And otherwise, I do a lot of work. Probably about 20% of what I do is attest work, opinion work, but 80% of what I do is more in the internal audit space. There's a variety of services we provide under that advisory internal audit umbrella, but that's what I do. Also very involved with the KSU, Kennesaw State University Internal Audit Center, and I teach the undergraduate internal auditing course at KSU, and have been doing that now for about pushing 2 years. So very involved in internal audit and internal audit education in the academic community, as well as serving clients for our firm. So here's our agenda for today. So we're going to do a quick overview of the Global Internal Audit Standards, which some of you probably already have seen, but just in case you hadn't, I think it's important to understand how this all came together. Well, we're going to cover Domain 1, which is the purpose of internal auditing. Then we're going to cover Domain 2, Ethics and Professionalism. And then from there, we're going to go through the 5 principles, which include demonstrate integrity, maintain objectivity, demonstrate competency, exercise due professional care, and maintaining confidentiality. And then we'll wrap up with any concluding remarks and any questions. I have a full slide deck. I always do a full slide deck, no matter what I say I'm actually going to do. So if we don't make it through the slide deck, we'll get really close. You have access to the slide deck. And the reason I do robust decks typically is so it's a takeaway for you. This is a subset of Domain 2, and it allows you to have basically a quick reference guide, if you will. Okay, so the Global Internal Audit Standards overview. So as you all know, the Global Internal Audit Standards are out, and hopefully they're applicable. Now, as of, I think, January the 9th of 2025, they were mandatory. As of January of 24, they were optional. You could early adopt, but that they were released in early 24, required in early 25. And this was the first time that the IPPF had been updated since 2017. And it's kind of a 2-year process. And there was a robust comment period and other input from a variety of stakeholders. And we'll look at that in a minute. But overall, the Global Internal Audit Standards, really the purpose of updating them was there were a variety of reasons, but really technology and the environment we're operating in today as providers of internal audit services, it has changed since 2017, and the IA felt like it was time, and the profession felt like it was time for the standards to reflect that. So really technology driven, a lot of emphasis too on the public interest and really the role of an internal auditor in the broader view of really the world and the globe. But at any rate, there was a robust comment period, and we'll move on. I do need to say everything herein, the Global Internal Audit Standards are trademarked by the IIA, and all the information in here was directly derived from the Global Internal Audit Standards. So we don't have pride of authorship here. It's not our material. We've extracted information from the Global Internal Audit Standards, which is trademarked by the IIA, and we're just regurgitating that and conveying that in hopefully a helpful format for you. And so you can get the ethics CPE if nothing else. So kind of how did this all come together? So over that 2-year period, they did surveys and they were made available in 22 languages. We sometimes forget, but as CIAs, it's a global certification. It's not a CPA. It's not unique to the United States or any particular country. It's global. So it was distributed in 22 languages. There were over 1,600 that were completed, and they contain 19,000 specific comments. Those 69% of the comments were from outside North America. So I'm assuming everybody on here is in the United States. And so interestingly, 70% of the comments actually came from outside the U.S., which is robust. 25% of survey responses were on behalf of organizations. So for instance, I responded on behalf of Carr, and Ingram. And then the other, 75% were from individuals who are internal auditors or in the internal audit profession in some way, shape, or form. And the final standards were issued, as I mentioned previously, on January the 9th, 2024. And there was also a supplemental document, and all this information is that there's really the IA's website is great. All the tools and all the things that are coming out and really everything that I'm conveying is out there for public consumption and easily obtained if you're a member. So I encourage you to go out there and leverage it. There was a report on standard setting and public comment processes for the Global Internal Audit Standards that actually describes the entirety of the process and provides a lot of data points. What I provided here is very high level, obviously, but there's a lot of good data in there if you really want to know how they came together, how the sausage was made, if you will. But end of the day, January 9, 2025, we as internal audit providers need to be compliant. So the fundamental structure, if you will, there's 15 guiding principles supported by 52 standards designed to promote conformance and achieve the purpose of internal auditing. The public interest encompasses the social and economic interest and overall well-being of society and the organizations operating within that society. Everything about the Global Internal Audit Standards was in the setting of the public interest and serving the public interest and the internal auditor's role in serving the public interest. So that's embedded in the standards. Internal auditing plays a critical role in enhancing an organization's ability to serve the public interest, and the IA is committed to setting standards with input from the public and to the benefit of the public. So public interest is a key underlying principle here in the standards. The standards apply to any individual or function that provides internal audit services, whether an organization employs an internal auditor directly, contracts with them through an external service provider, or both. So anybody who does internal audit, these rules apply. The standards apply to you. Whether you're a CIA or not, doesn't matter. They apply to you. Whether you're with Carr, and Ingram, or you're with, Coca-Cola or Delta or whomever, some of the great companies that come and speak at my class that I very much appreciate. Fortune 500 company down to middle market company that has an internal audit department of one. If you're providing internal audit services, the Global Internal Audit Standards apply to you, and therefore Domain 2, ethics and professionalism, applies to you. If you see the word must, obviously that is a requirement. If you see should or may, those are things that you should consider or you may do or consider related to implementation. Most of that is in the shoulds and the mays are in the considerations of actually implementation. What we're going over today is what are the rules, essentially? What are the actual standards? And so to get a good view here, I'm looking right now for a clock to make sure I keep up with it. To give you a view of how the standards are structured, just overall, this is helpful for me. I actually look at this routinely because I will, in my class, I'll actually use the standards and actually lecture from the standards in some instances. But so Domain 1, purpose of internal auditing. Domain 2, this is what we're going to cover today. And I've already mentioned the 5 principles. Within that, I think are 12 or 13 standards. We'll touch on each standard and go through each one of those, but that's just the structure. When you get beyond that, it's broken up into Domain 3, governing the internal audit function, which includes being authorized by the board, and it talks about the internal audit mandate and the charter and interaction with board and senior management. Where internal audit is positioned, which is near and dear to all internal auditors' hearts, and being overseen by the board and that interaction with the board, and what the responsibility of the audit function is to give the board the best chance to fulfill their obligations. Domain 4 is managing the internal audit function, and this gets down into what most of us do every day, and that includes planning, managing resources, communication, as well as quality assurance and making sure that work is being done in a high quality fashion, and that also touches on some of the the quality assessment reviews that are required. And then lastly, actually performing internal audit services, which talks about specific engagement planning, communication, risk assessment, work programs, the things that you would expect it to cover, and also actually conducting field work and those types of things, as well as reporting and then monitoring and testing remediation. So really from cradle to grave, if you will, on performing internal audit services. And then I again make a mention about requirements in terms of the musts and the other things. So in addition to the Global Internal Audit Standards, since they have been issued, there's something called topical requirements. So just so you're aware of these, there have been 2 topical requirements issued. And I may not say this exactly right, but essentially the topical requirements become an integral part of the standards. And so they're a required part of the standards, is my understanding of how these will work. There's only been 2 issued. There's one issued on cybersecurity this year, I believe it was this year, and on third parties. And that both of those, you can see, neither are effective yet. Cybersecurity will be effective 2/5. Third party will be effective 9/15. Other upcoming topical requirements are organizational behavior, which was expected to come out in December in this month. It could have come out and I missed it. But it's supposed to come out this month. I did not check to see if it come out, so I apologize for that. Organizational resilience is due presumably in the first half of 26. And then other topical requirements that have been approved by the board that are basically in the plan include anti-corruption and bribery, people management, fraud risk management, and sustainability. And then there's also topical requirement application guidance that's issued when a topical requirement is issued, and there is a topical requirement users guide out there. And again, all this information is readily available on IAA's website, and it's outstanding. It's easy to It's easy to obtain, and it's written in a way that is easily understood. And I found it super useful for my purposes and what I do for a living and in the classroom. Okay, so we're to a poll question. So, which is a correct statement regarding Domain 2 ethics and professionalism? That it includes 5 principles and 12 standards, that applies only to CIAs, so only to CIAs, represents best practices for internal auditors rather than requirements, or all of the above. So you're looking for the correct statement. We're getting them in. We're 90%. Okay. See if I can advance with that. I'm being told to advance. I'm not sure what I see versus what y'all see. So we have 3 people who have not responded, and we want you to get your CPE credit. 2 more. Okay, so the correct answer is all the above. It includes 5 principles and 12 standards that apply. It does not, it's not all the above. Yeah, it includes 15 principles and standards, applies only to certified internal auditors. That's false. Represents best practices. That's false. All the above is false. The only one that's true is that it includes 5 principles and 12 standards. And I guess I could have shared the results, but I'm not a good poll sharer person, it appears. And we did get everybody in, so everybody got their credit. Okay. And I'll get rid of that now. I'll do better on the next one. Okay. So domain 1, purpose of internal auditing. So internal auditing strengthens the organization's ability to create, protect, and sustain value by providing the board and management with independent, risk-based, and objective assurance, advice, insight, and foresight. That's the purpose statement. Obviously, internal auditors are on the team. Our job is to help management achieve objectives, and in the context of our role as internal auditors. Internal audit should strengthen the organization's successful achievement of objectives, should strengthen the governance, risk management, and control processes. And that, for internal audit purists or not, that's governance, risk management, and control. That's not just ICFR. It's not just SOX, right? It's governance, risk management, and control processes. Decision-making and oversight, reputation and credibility with its stakeholders. Obviously, stakeholders is a big deal in our world. And the ability for the organization to serve the public interest. So that's the purpose statement. Internal audit is most effective when it's performed by competent professionals in conformance with the standards which are set in the public interest. I told you public interest is in here. The internal audit function is independently positioned with direct accountability to the board. Obviously, that's a big deal for everybody. Where is internal audit positioned? Is it inhibited in any way in terms of the ability to be independent, be objective, do what needs to be done? That's always or can be a debate in terms of where in the management box and do they have direct access? Does internal audit have direct access to the audit committee or the board? Internal auditors are free of undue influence and committed to making objective assessments. So those are 3 components of when internal audit is most effective in consideration of the purpose statement. Okay, domain 2, while we're all here, 22 minutes in, domain 2, ethics and professionalism. So domain 2 replaces the old IIA code of ethics. It's superseded by this, although there's similarities, they're not exactly the same. It applies to all individuals and entities providing internal audit services, including myself being with a professional services firm. The CAE is expected to support and promote conformance of the Global Internal Audit Standards, and conformance provides the basis for reliance on internal auditors' work and judgment. So the fact that others rely on our work is based on the premise that we are doing the work in accordance with the Global Internal Audit Standards. So from there, under Principle 1, demonstrate integrity, this is Standard 1.1. So internal auditors must perform their work with honesty and professional courage, and we'll talk more about professional courage in a minute. Internal auditors must be truthful, accurate, clear, open, and respectful in all professional relationships and communications, even when expressing skepticism or offering an opposing viewpoint. Internal auditors must not make false, misleading, or deceptive statements, nor conceal or omit findings or other pertinent information from communications. So we've got to thoughtfully consider what we're conveying, because a lot of times we're critiquing work, if you will, that someone else has done, a control someone else is performing, activities, relevant activities, and we're critiquing it in some way, either saying this is how it could improve or this is the issue. And obviously, as internal auditors, we don't need to make false, misleading, or deceptive statements. We need to be transparent. And so that's what the point of Standard 1.1 is. Continuing on with Standard 1.1, all material facts known to the internal auditor must be disclosed, and internal auditors must exhibit courage by communicating truthfully and taking appropriate action, even when confronted by dilemmas and difficult situations. So if you've been doing this a while, you've experienced the scenarios where you do have to have professional courage, because sometimes we have different auditees, if you will. We audit different processes. We have different auditees. There's different cultures. And at the end of the day, there are people who push back a lot, and that's okay. That's part of the process to some degree, but we need to make sure that we stay the course, that we have professional courage, and that we take things to where they need to be when we thoughtfully consider all facts and circumstances around a potential issue, recommendation, etc. The CAE's got to maintain a work environment where auditors feel supported when they have a legitimate evidence-based engagement results, whether favorable or unfavorable. And so the CAE, and as you all know, and I'll just say this for you just to make sure, the CAE doesn't have to be the CAE, right? That's whoever is in charge of audit. So whoever is in charge of audit is who needs to, is the CAE. Could be internal audit director, could be internal audit manager, could be internal auditor. Doesn't matter. CAE is synonymous with that. So the CAE needs to support internal auditors when they have legitimate recommendations, findings and recommendations. Standard 1.2, organization's ethical expectations. So this is the ethical expectations of the organization with which you are working. Internal auditors need to understand, respect, meet, and contribute to the legitimate, can't get that one out, the legitimate and ethical expectations of the organization, and be able to recognize conduct that is contrary to those expectations. So you need to conform to the ethical expectations of your organization. And furthermore, though, assuming that they are legitimate, those ethical expectations, the internal auditor should be a cheerleader, should encourage and promote an ethics-based culture in the organization. So not just adhere, but be a champion for the ethical environment in which you operate as an internal auditor. And that's not talking about the CAE, right, or the director or whomever. It's talking about internal auditors. Internal auditors should be the champions for ethics in their organizations. Standard 1.3, legal and ethical behavior. Internal auditors, shouldn't engage in anything or be party to any activity that is illegal or discreditable to the profession. They must understand and abide by all the laws and regs in the industry and the geography that they're in. If an internal auditor identifies legal or regulatory violations, they must report such incidents to the individuals or entities that have authority to take appropriate action. Now, what I would say is if you're a young person on this call, I'm not saying that if you find something that seems to be a potential legal issue that you call the police. You need to elevate that within the hierarchy of the internal audit department. But what this is saying is, hey, you need to be, we as internal auditors need to abide by the laws and regs of which we're aware in all circumstances. We need to be transparent and thoughtful about that. And then when we identify things that might be legal or regulatory, we need to elevate those. And that might not mean that we're reaching out to a third party. It might mean that we're reaching out to our CAE, or if you're the CAE, it might be that you're reaching out to in-house counsel. I mean, or you're reaching out to the audit committee. It just depends on the culture and the hierarchy of how information flows. But nonetheless, we have an obligation there if we identify things that are legal or regulatory in nature. Okay, to the next poll question. I will advance so that you all can see that. So for internal auditors, demonstration of integrity includes performing work with honesty and professional courage. I would say yes. Disclosure of all material facts known to them. Meeting the legitimate ethical expectations of their organization. I'll stop short of giving you the answer. All righty. Moving rapidly. We've had some people join. Good. 94% responding. For those who joined since the last poll question, which I think there's about 15, 14, you only missed one poll question. So if you get this one and the other two, you're still good to go, I think. $121. 3 more. We got 2 more that hadn't responded. I'm gonna wait just a second. I want everybody to get your CPE. Got to get those 2 ethics hours for your CIA. Going once, going twice. Oh, 1 more hit. Just 1 person hadn't responded. All right. Pressing on. So the correct answer was, well, I need to share the results. Correct answer is all of the above. All those things represent demonstration of integrity. So the correct answer was D. And we will press on. Okay. Principle 2, maintaining objectivity. So internal auditors must maintain professional objectivity when performing all aspects of internal audit services. Professional objectivity requires internal auditors to apply an impartial and unbiased mindset and make judgments based on balanced assessment of all relevant information. So you have to maintain and note this, standard 2.1 is individual objectivity. So this is your objectivity as an individual internal auditor. And this is what that means. Internal auditors must be aware of and manage potential biases. We all have biases of some sort based on our life, if you will, our environments, where we were born, blah, blah, blah. So all those things make up who we are, and we have biases that sometimes we don't even realize we have. Standard 2.2 is safeguarding objectivity. So this is safeguarding individual internal auditors' objectivity. Internal auditors must recognize and avoid or mitigate actual, potential, and perceived impairments. Internal auditors must not accept any tangible or intangible items, such as a gift, regard, a reward, or favor that may impair or be presumed to impair objectivity. So you can't receive from an auditee, you cannot accept a tangible or intangible item, gift, reward, or favor that may appear or or even be presumed to impair objectivity. So you just have to be careful with that. That would include Braves tickets and things like that, I would think. Just be careful not to make sure that you don't create an issue that it gives the appearance that your objectivity might be impaired. Internal auditors must avoid conflicts of interest and must not be unduly influenced by their own interest or the interest of others, including senior management and others in position of authority, or by the political environment or other aspects of the surroundings. So, all that being said, you are responsible for maintaining your individual objectivity, and the safeguard to that would be to be very thoughtful about perception and what you accept versus not. And then, one of the things that we're all, even me as an outside provider, is being unduly influenced by senior management, because obviously senior management would typically prefer there not be recommendations in their reports. We call them recommendations, you call them findings or other, but that would be their preference. Continuing on continuing on under Standard 2.2, internal auditors must refrain from assessing specific activities for which they were previously responsible. So if you were responsible for a department or an activity previously, and you need to consider that. You need to make sure you disclose it and that everybody knows that, and that you thoughtfully consider it, because objectivity is presumed to be impaired if you're providing assurance services, not advisory services, but assurance services for an activity for which you had responsibility within the previous 12 months. So there's a presumption there that there's an issue regarding objectivity that you need to make sure you disclose and work through. 2.2, still sticking with safeguarding objectivity. If the internal audit function is to provide assurance services where it has previously performed advisory services. So we're going to do an assurance engagement. We had recently or previously done a consulting engagement, also known as advisory. The CAE must confirm that the nature of the advisory services does not impair objectivity, and must assign resources such that individual objectivity is managed. Assurance engagements for functions over which the CAE has responsibility must be overseen by an independent party outside the internal audit function. So what this is saying is if there is if you're doing an assurance engagement that, well, let me back up. So the CAE must confirm that the nature of the advisory services does not impair objectivity and must assign. Yeah. So the CAE is responsible for making the determination if the advisory services has impacted or might impact the assurance engagement. And so they need to take steps accordingly. One obvious step would be to have a different team do it. Have a different team do the assurance engagement than did the advisory engagement. But that might not always be possible. And then also it goes on to say if the CAE has a conflict of some sort or perceived conflict in that regard, then somebody else needs to oversee the engagement. An example for me that comes to mind would be, it's not unusual for enterprise risk management, ERM, to roll up under the audit function or the CAE. Well, maybe that's an example of where the CAE has to step aside and somebody else has to be the responsible person in management over that engagement, or in the internal audit department over that engagement. I don't know, I got a little tongue tied on that one. Okay. Continuing on with Standard 2.2, if auditors are to provide advisory services relating to activities for which they had previous responsibilities, they must disclose potential impairments to the party requesting the services before accepting the engagement. So this is talking about when you're performing consulting services, but you used to own this process, then you need to disclose that and it needs to be evaluated. The CAE must establish methodologies to address impairments of objectivity, perceived and actual impairments of objectivity. That needs to be built into the infrastructure and the methodologies of the internal audit function. So those things are going to come up. You need to have processes in place to deal with them. Everybody needs to be transparent, both complete and accurate, and then they can be worked through accordingly. Disclosing impairments to objectivity. If objectivity is impaired in fact or appearance, the details of the impairment must be disclosed to the appropriate parties. And if internal auditors become aware of an impairment that may affect their objectivity, they must disclose it to the CAE or designated supervisor. So if you feel like your objectivity is impaired, you need to elevate it, wherever that might be, depending on your structure. If you have a CAE, it would be there. If you're younger, it might be a manager, it might be a supervisor, but just make sure you raise your hand and elevate so that it can appropriately be evaluated. It can be disclosed to all appropriate parties, and a reasonable course of action can be determined. If an impairment that affects the reliability or perceived reliability of the engagement's findings, recommendations, or conclusion is discovered after the fact, the CAE must discuss this concern with the board, senior management, and any other relevant stakeholders. So this is after the fact. You've done the engagement. You determine afterwards that there is a actual or perceived, there's an issue with the reliability of the work because of objectivity or lack thereof. That just needs to be elevated by the CAE to the appropriate parties and discussed to determine if anything else needs to be done to remedy the situation. If the objectivity of the CAE is impaired in fact or appearance, the CAE must disclose the impairment to the board. So that's standard 2.3, which that was as well. So all three of those were 2.3. So objectivity is important. It's foundational, and you need to make sure that you do everything you can to be transparent and to maintain objectivity. So with that, poll question number 3. We have here. So which statement is not accurate regarding internal audit objectivity? So we're looking for the not. The CAE must establish methodologies to address impairments to objectivity. Only impairments of objectivity in fact, as opposed to in appearance, must be disclosed. Internal auditors must recognize and avoid or mitigate potential impairments to objectivity. Objectivity is presumed to be impaired if an internal auditor provides assurance services for an activity for which the internal auditor had responsibility within the previous 12 months. So those are the options for the not. We are moving along with 78%, 81%. We're holding. We have 7, 6, 5. 4 folks still need to respond. Making sure I'm watching my clocks here. We have to be on at least 50 minutes, but not more than an hour. So I sped up a little bit. Maybe I need to slow down. Okay, how many we have? We have 1 night. Yeah, so we've got 4 people, 3 people who have not responded. So I'm gonna wait just a minute before I close it down. Everybody needs that ethics CPE. Down to 3. Anybody going once, going twice? In the poll. So 97% responded, and the correct answer is which of these is not accurate is B, because impairments of objectivity in fact and appearance must be disclosed, not only impairments objectivity in fact. So that was poll question number 3, and I've lost my cursor. There we go. All right. Principle 3 is demonstrate competency. So I've always found it interesting. Maybe it's not interesting to anybody but me, but competency is considered to be in the realm of ethical and professional behavior, right? Are you competent to carry out the task? And that is an integral part of ethics and professionalism. So internal auditors must possess or obtain the competencies to perform their responsibilities successfully. And it talks about, what the required competencies include: the knowledge, skills, and ability suitable for one's job position in general, and responsibilities commensurate with the level of experience. To me, I think about, do you have the competency to do your job, but do you have the competency and experience to do this particular project that comes up? Internal auditors must possess or develop knowledge of the IA's Global Internal Audit Standards. So that applies to all. Again, these standards apply to everybody that does internal audit, right? If you do internal audit services, and this is saying, hey, you have to develop a knowledge of the Global Internal Audit Standards. That's not just meaning if you are a CIA. That means anybody who does this. If you don't choose for whatever reason to do a CIA, to obtain the CIA, then you still have a responsibility to understand standards. Internal auditors must engage only in those services for which they have or can attain the necessary competencies. So don't do audits of things you don't understand. Get help. Each internal auditor is responsible for continually developing and applying competencies, and it's up to the CAE to ensure that the function collectively possesses the competencies to carry out the internal audit services as delineated in the charter and the internal audit plan. So the CAE's got to make sure that happens. Note this, though, that doesn't mean that all that expertise is within the internal audit function, because this also presumes, as it should, that the CAE can reach outside the organization. So if you don't have the cybersecurity skill set on staff to do what needs to be done, you can reach out to another firm, a professional services firm, to help co-source. So this considers in-house and external resource when it's talking about internal audit. CPE, basically what this says is CPE is really important, and continuing to maintain and develop your competencies are important, and that CPE is an integral part of that. And then more specifically, if you have certifications, you need to make sure you meet the CPE requirements. So I have multiple certifications, but as it relates to internal audit, I have a CIA and I have the CRMA. I'm certified in risk management assurance. Both of those have CPE requirements, including ethics. And I need to comply with those, but I'd have to comply with those if I want to maintain my certification. But CPE is important from the Global Internal Audit Standards perspective, per standard 3.2. All right, principle 4, exercise due professional care. Performance with the Global Internal Audit Standards. So internal auditors must plan and perform internal audit services in accordance with the Global Internal Audit Standards. The internal audit functions methodologies must be established, documented, and maintained in alignment with the standards. Internal auditors must follow the standards and the internal audit functions methodologies when planning and performing internal audit services and communicating results. So you have to plan and perform your audits in accordance with the standards, and the methodologies and documentation and et cetera need to align with the Global Internal Audit Standards. And that is a must. That is a requirement in order to apply due professional care in planning and performing internal audit services. Internal auditors must exercise due professional care by assessing the nature, circumstances, and requirements of the services to be provided, including. So this is a compilation of things that need to be considered from a due professional care perspective. So the organization's strategy and objectives, the interest for those for whom the internal audit services are provided, and the interest of other stakeholders. So the stakeholders can be broad. We do a lot of work with banks, and so banks are highly regulated. We have a lot of stakeholders when we do internal audit in banks. Example would be, obviously the auditee is a stakeholder. The management team over the auditee is a stakeholder. Senior management is a stakeholder. The audit committee is a stakeholder. The board is a stakeholder. But also the banking regulators are stakeholders, and they may have more than one, depending on their charter. So they may have 2 or 3 bank regulators. They're stakeholders. So the depositors of the institution are stakeholders. The shareholders of the institution are stakeholders. So In a highly regulated environment, your stakeholders are robust, and those stakeholders have a higher degree of interest in certain areas rather than others. There's certainly lower risk areas that may, while you have the same stakeholders no matter what, the level of interest and risk and all that may be different. But in order to demonstrate appropriate due professional care, you need to consider all the relevant stakeholders. You need to consider the adequacy of governance, risk management, and controls, GRC, the cost in relation to the potential benefits of the services to be performed. If it costs more than the benefit to the institution, maybe we don't need to be doing this work. Maybe this audit doesn't need to be done. Maybe it needs to be combined with another audit supplementally or something. But are we a good steward of our organization's dollar? Or in my instance, when I'm providing services to my client, am I being a good steward of my client's dollar? Other things, the extent and timeliness of the work needed, the relative complexity, materiality, or significance, the probability of significant errors, fraud, and noncompliance, and the use of appropriate techniques, tools, and technology. So in order to demonstrate due professional care in accordance with the Global Internal Audit Standards, all these things need to be considered by the internal auditor. And this really is internal auditors. So this would be, from the CAE down through the organization of the internal audit organization, if you will. Professional skepticism. You can't talk about internal audit without talking about professional skepticism. I don't think you can talk about audit without it. So let's see what the Global Internal Audit Standards has to say about it. So in order to exercise due professional care, here's the things that internal auditors must do. They must maintain an attitude that includes inquisitiveness. Be inquisitive. Critically assess the reliability of information. This one is important because we obtain information from clients and we use it, we evaluate it, we look at it in relation to other information, and sometimes it serves as the primary basis for our observation, finding, recommendation. Well, is that information reliable? I mean, how do we know that information is both complete, accurate, and complete? Also known as reliable at some level, right? So can we rely on this information? I think it's very important for us to always assess. Be straightforward and honest when raising concerns and asking questions about inconsistent information, and seek additional evidence to make a judgment about information and statements that might be incomplete, inconsistent, false, or misleading. So make sure you know what you're relying on. Make sure you have a basis for reliance. And to the extent you don't feel like you do, then maybe you need to seek additional evidence that somehow supports your conclusion or corroborates the information that you're relying on. Okay. Poll question. We're actually hitting this on pretty good time. So, which of the following are accurate statements regarding internal auditor competency? So, which of these are true? Internal auditors must possess or obtain the competencies to perform their responsibilities successfully. Internal auditors must pursue continuing professional development, including education and training. Each internal auditor is responsible for continually developing and applying the competencies necessary to fulfill their professional responsibilities. Is it any one of those, or is it all of them? This is the fourth and final question. You have to have 3 to get CPE. You have to stay on the full time to get CPE. And we're getting close to wrap up. Waiting on 3 folks to respond. That was pretty quick. Waiting on 2. Don't lose your CPE. Ethics CPE can be hard to come by, especially free ethics CPE. Down to 2. Okay. Going once, going twice. Gone. So the correct answer is all the above. All those things are accurate statements. Each of those are accurate regarding internal auditor competency. And I think did I share the results? I am now. There are the results. 96% got it right. Okay, that's the last poll question. It's not the last section. Principle 5, maintain confidentiality. We're right on 11:50, so we're at 50 minutes. Okay, so standard 5.1, the use of information. This one was also interesting to me because when I think of using information appropriately, I think about sharing information, willfully sharing information that probably shouldn't be shared or something like that. But we'll go through this and it'll kind of put a different spin on that. So internal auditors must follow the relevant policies, procedures, laws, and regs when using information. The information must not be used for personal gain or in a manner contrary to or detrimental to the organization's legitimate and ethical objectives. And this is kind of what I think about. My first thought is about misusing information, sharing information that you should not share, or somehow using it to your benefit. And let's face it, I mean, as internal auditors, we do see confidential information. We see, even if it's not confidential, it's sensitive. And we don't, not only do we not need to share it, we don't need to talk about it. And that's just part of it. In financial institutions, which again is financial services I do a lot of, I mean, there's a lot of financial, tax returns and personal financial statements and business financials of privately held companies, all sorts of things that are used in making a loan, if you will, for a bank. And those things, we see those, and we may actually know some of the people in the community if it's a bank in our markets. And so we have to, treat that information sensitively and not disclose it outside the engagement team, and only disclose it within the engagement team as necessary. Standard 5.2, protection of information. So considerations specifically relevant to the internal audit function include, custody, retention, and disposal. Just how does that work? How do you secure the information? The information needs to be secure. You need to have a retention policy, and you need to have a disposal policy, but you also need to have a method of disposal depending on the nature of the data. Release of engagement records to internal and external parties. I'll give an example again. In my world, banking regulators rely on what we do. So they ask for our work papers. Well, we make sure that the client agrees and that they give us permission, but we perform internal audits of financial institutions with the expectation that the banking regulators or credit union, if it's a credit union or some other entity, that they're going to ask for our work papers. So that's just part of our world, but could also be, governmental entities or other entities could be subpoenaed by court or something like that. Handling of access to or copies of confidential information when no longer needed. So what do you do with stuff that is sensitive, even confidential, and you don't need it anymore? Do you have a policy or process where you go ahead and dispose of that information so as to reduce your risk and the risk to your auditee/client/company? Continuing on with protection of information, and lastly, Standard 5.2, internal auditors must not disclose confidential information to unauthorized parties unless there's a legal or professional responsibility to do so. Internal auditors must manage the risk of exposing or disclosing information inadvertently, and the CAE must ensure that the internal audit function and the individual assisting the internal audit function adhere to the same protection requirements. One thing I think about is that it's your laptop. If you use a laptop, it's your work laptop. It's got a lot of information on it. It's got access to a lot of information. It's not just about passwords and whatever. Making sure you protect your laptop. Make sure that you don't put it in a place that somebody else could grab it or obtain it and easily obtain it and lose your laptop and potentially give them access if they can get into that information. So just being very thoughtful and careful about the security and protection of the information that we all see from as internal auditors. So with that, we are kind of to question time. I don't think we really had any questions come through. If we did, they'll give them to me and I can respond to you separately. But again, we appreciate you investing. I hope it was an investment of your time today. I know hopefully all you have now completed your ethics CPE for the year and can move on to the holidays and not worry about it. But again, thank you for your time, and hopefully we'll see you all again on the next webinar. Thank you.